Welcome to In the Spirit Conversations, and today I'm joined by Tina Bailey, who is joining us from the States, but she actually lives in Bali, which we'll talk about that a little later on. Tina's had an interesting life journey. She's actually an artist who has emerged as providing support to the prisons in Bali, and of course as an interfaith chaplain. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your background, Tina, so that people get an understanding before we start talking about some of the things you've been involved in, and of course in a COVID-19 world.
Okay, well, I claim many hats. As you said, I'm an interfaith chaplain. I'm also a dancer, a painter. Been living overseas and internationally away from the United States for the past almost 25 years. I find that my journey has just been a work in progress. The doors open, and sometimes they open unexpectedly, and I try to do the best I can and try to find the skills and work with as many people as possible. And it's led me down a journey that's actually fascinating. But I see the intersection between art and spirituality very deeply. I have a doctorate in ministry with a focus on the intersection of art and spirituality. Primarily because went on that journey because as a woman who is also in the spiritual world and the artistic world, so many times as women, we are so fragmented. We wear so many hats, but it's quite integrated. And so my actual journey for my doctorate was actually in a process, as I call it, a defragmentation, in bringing together all these different components that make up me as one person, although I may have several identities in different situations.
One of the things we've been talking about in a number of these conversations, spirituality has come up over and over and over again. And generally, unless people have a deep religious faith, people find it very difficult to understand what spirituality is and the fact that we all have it in some form. And it's an important part of resilience. Do you find that art allows them to explore that, what it might mean for them, or as a door opener to spirituality?
I think absolutely that is the case, because they both inform each other. Throughout history, in the best examples, art and spirituality have been connected. When they've been divorced, it's become very odd. We lose the fullness of all of it, especially on the spiritual side. It can become quite hollow and felt quite regimented and legalistic and judgmental. When we bring in the imagination and the creativity and the arts back into spirituality, then we find more grace. We find more openness. We found more freedom to actually explore things that might be scary. But when we engage our imaginations, then we open up doors for deeper understanding of the mystical, of the spiritual, in whatever framework someone needs.
So
that makes sense.
What does, you've worked in the Bali prisons, and there's 2 prisons in Bali, is that correct? Is that my understanding? Yeah. Are you providing an arts studio, or what do you do?
So there are actually, I don't even know the full number of prisons in Bali, but I actually assist in 2 and help facilitate a few entrances for people to work in one other as well. So the 2 where I spend most of my time is the 2 prisons that are most famous with the name Karobokan prison. They used to be one prison, men and women, but now they're separate. And so I'm actually in both. My entrance into Karobokan prison was by invitation from Myron Sukumaran, who was one of the Bali 9. He created the program. This is something that not everyone realizes, but it's very important. I came into this along with other people who have come through his journey to assist him. He's the one who created it. He's the one who did the groundwork. And I think the success of that program, even to this day, is because it was inmate initiated, inmate led, with the blessing of the prison. And anyone else who comes in must join in that process. And so by no means would I ever say that that is a program that would be mine. I've carried it on for him in the absence of his presence. As we know, we lost him in a very unjust way. And my promise to him was to continue the program after he was gone. And this month is actually 5 years since his execution. April 29th will be the 5-year anniversary of his execution.
Gosh, time's just flown on that. Doesn't seem like 5 years. The world's changed so dramatically in that time. What took you to Bali originally? It's a long way from the States.
Very true. My husband often will say, well, we thought we were going to Mali. It's his joke. But we knew we wanted to be doing work overseas. He had spent time in Africa. I'd spent a little time in Africa, a little experience in Europe, which gave me definitely the bug for the broader world. And so we took a job within a faith-based organization that actually allowed us to chart our own course. We went to Indonesia with the task of actually working to bring together, it's so funny when I look back on it, to bring together, to help people work instead of their own private silos from all of these church organizations, church organizations, NGOs, to come together for synergy. Well, as you can imagine, that didn't necessarily happen. Of course, we were also the greenest people on the field. But over time, we actually found our feet. We're both artists. I'm a dancer, painter. He's a musician. And we began doing a lot of work with local partners doing community development. We were involved in the religious community there. But as artists, it took us outside those doors. We don't fit well in boxes, as most artists do not. But I can actually say, it sounds cliche, but it's actually true. We have an organization, a community, not an organization, called Narwastu. It's the Narwastu Art Community. And that really came out of a desire to learn some Balinese culture, dance, music. We started, and I kid you not, it simply was, and they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and they went home to their country, and they sent more people. And so our community built very organically. It wasn't with some grand vision, but it was actually coming together, accepting people from all different backgrounds to come together in a common field and create art together. And that is a big piece of what we do. And it's made up of every walk of life. Local Balinese from the village, from the city, Indonesians from other areas who never had a chance to learn music and are now adults, internationals who come, especially students who come to the International University who want to learn music and dance and visual art, but they're trying to figure out how to do that in a cross-cultural setting. They find their way to us, and in many ways we become almost local parents. Lots of food at our house, lots of time together, exploring spirituality, and even several of these people come and join with social action in both of the prisons when we can make that work. And so, because they get a better understanding of how to give. They've come to Indonesia to learn, but they're also eager to become involved in something that's solid, not just the touristy plan thing, but actually grassroots. How can I help? And that's been a very good thing for the inmates that we work with, because it gives them fresh people to connect with, but also gives a deeper understanding of the humanity. It gets us beyond that idea of prisoner. Instead, it's someone with a name, someone with a story. And they interact as equals, as peers. And that is a beautiful thing when it happens.
We often talk about chaplaincy as the ability to sit in the mud with somebody, no matter what's going on. Um, often do you find you draw upon your chaplaincy skills in your art therapy? I should imagine it's an enormous amount. Is that true?
It is. It is, because my working with the people in the prison specifically with the arts is not about making them great artists. It's about opening up their hearts, opening up trust, helping them look into their own self and begin to find their path. In the beginning, when Mayu asked me to come in, one of the first things I said to Mayu is, I want you to understand, Mayu, I'm happy to come do this, but I don't touch other people's artwork. I will help them. I'll give them examples through another piece of paper, but I'm not going to do the work for them that they're capable of doing themselves. Because if I do it, they don't learn.
Yeah.
And part of that is because so many people don't actually, they haven't had the opportunity to solve their own problems. When you can solve your own problem, when you can correct something in a painting, it's so empowering and it's so healing. And to have someone trust you enough to be able to sit with them and trust that they have the ability to work out their own struggles and issues, and you can sit with them, like you said, in the mud. Sometimes it leads to very intense conversations. Sometimes there are tears, but there's a lot of laughter, a lot of laughter.
Yeah. So you've been involved in Bali with you were there when the Bali bombings happened, and you were there when the tsunami happened in Indonesia. Were you involved at the front line or around the situation?
I was involved, I wouldn't say the front line, but in a few areas when the Bali bombs happened. Part of that was trying to figure out how to help, because it was a very interesting situation, and we learned a lot. I learned a lot through this, that just because someone says we've got it under control does not mean someone has it under control, because there's a lot of issues that come into play. Sometimes it's pride, sometimes it's just not knowing what to do, and knowing how to step in and how to step back is definitely a dance. I was at the airport helping the walking wounded leave and sitting with them in the process and trying to take as much advice as I could, specifically from the officials from Australia, especially from Canberra. They were actually pretty amazing in how they were giving guidance. There was a calmness, and I was quite impressed with how they actually handled that, with the guidance that they gave of how to help people decompress a little as they were getting ready to go home. It was a very intense situation. In that, that was probably my first experience of how the arts is so important in dealing with trauma and healing and the therapeutic side. Living in Bali, even though I live in Sanur, we could hear the bombs. We didn't know what they were. We didn't know until the next morning actually what had happened. But the experience of going through that, feeling helpless, not knowing what to do, watching the death count come up, even walking to the store and having Balinese come across the alleys to speak to us. There was so much fear because they didn't want everybody to go home, of course, and they were scared. So I created a dance. It was a little bit of a short story, and it actually circles back around to later with the Bali Nine. I wanted to mourn myself, but I also wanted to give a gift to others. And so I created a dance of grief. It was auto-paired, and I realized that I could find no song with words, because this was so international and there were so many cultures and so many different ways of grieving, that this was the only piece of music that I found that I could really embody. And so I did it in a memorial service, and actually twice. And at one point, at that point, I think it was the British consul, came up to me and he cried. And he said, "Thank you for giving me permission to cry, because I've had to be strong for so many other people. I have not had a chance to cry myself." And the first time after I had done this, we walked to the bomb site. It was a little church in Legion. And there was this young reporter, and I remembered her. And so I remembered walking beside her, and I asked her how she was doing, because she was clearly in the midst of reporting this. She was from Australia, blonde, very pretty. And she said, "I really don't know how I'm processing this yet. This is where we came for our holidays." I remember that, it stuck in my mind. Years later, the week after Maya was moved to Nusa Island, I sat down with Cindy Walkner. She's the person who wrote the pastor and the painter and the pastor, I think, of the book. She's done a lot of reporting with the Bali Nine. I sat across the table from her and I said, "Cindy, I have a strange question for you, but did you report on the Bali Nine? I mean, the bombing?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Do you remember this woman walking beside you?" "I don't know, but I'm wondering if this is you." And I said it to her and she said, "Yes, I remember that." And so it's this circle, and that long ago, and here she is now, our paths have crossed again. It's both related in very different ways, but also about processing and about the arts, and journalism itself is an art form when done correctly.
Incredible, incredible. So you're in the States at the moment. You must feel sort of really disconnected because your home is in Bali, you've got family in the States, we're in COVID-19. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's happening around COVID where you are, and then perhaps what you know about what's happening in Bali. I mean, we're hearing bits about Indonesia having significant issues, and we're certainly hearing on the news about the States and tragically the number of deaths related to this awful virus. But you're in Maryland, is that where you are at the moment? Or?
South Carolina.
Right, okay.
So in the deep South. Yes, it's fascinating. I think in the United States, there still is, even though the news is there, I think America is so big, similar to Australia, and it's so big. But I think, I don't know if I can say, I think there's a lot of people in America, probably not a surprise, who have quite a rebellious streak, a lot of skepticism. And I think that's detrimental to believing the news. And so I think people are taking it seriously, but I still think there is a number of people who are not, and that's where the danger lies. There's a concern that the United States will actually open up sooner than it should. We don't know yet if that's going to happen. I really hope it does not. I really hope that people do take it seriously. When we came to the United States from Bali, we did a 14-day quarantine. It was not required. That's unfortunate. It should have been required, but we did it because we knew this is what should happen, and it was suggested. And so when we finished our 14 days, we had to finally go to the grocery store, and we're wearing gloves, we're wearing a mask, and people were careful in the grocery store, but most people were not wearing masks or gloves or any protection. Now I think that's changing a little bit more. I mean, the death toll, I'm not sure what it is now, but I know it's over 30,000. It's horrendous that it's happening. It's showing up in many places. Where I am, they are careful, but it's probably not as careful as it should be. When you go out, you can feel it. There's no restaurants who serve you inside. You have to get your food that way. It's mostly grocery stores and places that are considered essential that are open. My family, specifically my father and my sister, are 4 hours away. I've now been in the States for 1 month and still don't know when I can see them, which is hard. I can see to be that close, normally on the other side of the world. My father's in his 70s and drive 4.5 hours to get to him. Am I taking something to him? I don't know. And so it's definitely it's an emotional pull of what to do, what not to do. And then of course, because of living in Bali for almost 25 years, our real home is in Bali. I have my cat and 2 more cats that showed up in front of my house 2 weeks before leaving that are now growing up without me. The Balinese, overall, they're doing things to take things seriously. For example, our Narwastu community, which is our Gamelan community, is no longer practicing because the Banjars, the local communities, are saying you can't gather. That's positive. A few of the students were asking in our WhatsApp group, when are we going to start back? And I was very pleased to see that our teacher very clearly explained, we're following what everyone says to do. We can't say when we're going to start. We'll let you know when it's possible, but it's probably going to be a while. So that's positive that that is happening. It's hard to know what you hear in the media of the real situation. What we do know is the testing in Indonesia is not sufficient enough to give you an accurate total. I hear that they're working on that. The other thing that I have heard, but I have not, in speaking with the prisons, I have not gotten any word specifically if any of the inmates that I work with have been able to go home. But the plan from Jakarta was that they were going to release over 30,000 inmates who had come. I think they had served at least 2/3 of their sentence, and if their sentence was not narcotics related, that they would be free to go home once they were tested. I have not heard if they've actually done that. I really hope that they do, because that is a big fear for me. Even before they stopped people from going into the prisons, I had already stopped because I'd learned enough about the virus to realize I may be being careful, but if I go in and I don't know and I'm taking something in, that's not something I want to risk for the men and women that I work with.
It's certainly
but
provided.
I didn't know that happened. I didn't see it for months.
Yeah, it's certainly provided significant challenges for us all, related to family and friends, as you're talking about. But in every conversation that we've had in the spirit of things, I mean, obviously it's quite a dark conversation, but there was also this other side of hope and of humanity really rising above. And in Australia, we've seen some extraordinary things of people helping each other and looking out for elderly neighbours and virtual choirs and connection. Now, certainly that doesn't solve the problem, but it does go to say that we're all in this together, which is the catchphrase. Are you seeing that sense of community coming out of this? Because frankly, in my lifetime, this is the greatest leveler that I've ever seen. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, it impacts everybody.
Absolutely. We lead a contemplative meditation group on Sunday evenings normally in Bali. And so we've actually taken that onto Zoom. And this morning, trying to figure out how we could involve as many people who still live in Bali, who return back to their country. And so the The only time we could figure it would work with most people was 5:30 a.m. here, which would be 5:30 p.m. in Bali, and it allows those in Europe and a few folks in Australia to join. And we were having the meditation time and hearing from people that we haven't actually been together in several years, because our core group still meets, but people go home, and to actually look on the screen and see someone from Spain, someone living in the Netherlands, back in Bali. We've had someone from New Zealand, from the US. It's pretty amazing and us being in the States now, to have that and to be able to talk and to see. One of the girls who'd lived in Bali, she had her baby with her, and I hadn't seen her baby. And so here we are in this technology coming together. And it was just really so bonding. And we realized, we talked about it afterwards, that after this is over, we will continue doing this. Even when we're doing it in person, we will still do this. And even a random moment, we were riding bicycles, which was it's an unexpected joy. I don't ride my bicycle much in Bali. It's just a little too dangerous. So we were out doing a bike ride, and we were pushing it a bit, and I needed to sit down and kind of regroup. And this car pulled up, and this man got out, and he ran across the street, and he handed his 2 bottles of water, and he ran back in his car and got backed up and went to his housing development. That probably wouldn't have happened several months ago. But I do believe that we're seeing humanity and valuing relationships more. And sometimes it's that absence that makes us reevaluate and revisit what's important. And I do think there's a tremendous hope in that.
That sort of leads to my last question, and it's funny how it just happened in the progression of the conversation, and it's around self-care. I mean, the helping professions are all taught, that we have to take care of ourselves because we can't help other people unless we're really nurturing ourselves. But the commonality, it's a bit like spirituality. There are such vastly different definitions around self-care. For some people, they think it's a bath bomb and a yoga retreat, which I guess could be, but it's much more inner than those things. How do you practice your own self-care, and what are you drawing upon during these tough times?
I'm doing a lot more reading. I'm taking advantage of that. I still would like to do more. I've been doing a lot of Qigong. I already was doing that, and it's so meditative and so grounding, because being a dancer, I can be completely in my body, but it's been quite nice to do specific practices with Qigong, to be thinking through my body in a way that is another practice. I've done yoga, I've done Kundalini, but I've found that for me, the Qigong meditation has been beautiful. And then adding in, sometimes dance with it, sometimes just stillness meditation on my mat. I light a candle every morning, and I sit, I move, I just listen to my body and greet the day. I've been watching this tree in front of the window of the room I'm sitting in get leaves. And it's so amazing to take the time and look at that. And just see, I feel like the last 2 days, they've doubled in their size. The other thing I've been doing, I'm going to grab something quickly. It wasn't planned, but it just has, for me, has been right. I had a friend she had us make our own sense of prayer beads. We put them together. And so every morning, I opened another book, I think it was a journal, and at some point, someone gave me a little copy of the Beatitudes. And so with my prayer beads, I'm praying the Beatitudes every morning. because they're just so connecting to so many parts of humanity. And I was just decided, I was looking and I thought, oh, this is going to be my prayer practice every morning. I'm just going to pray the Beatitudes, use my prayer beads, and Kundalini, and sometimes Qigong. So it's definitely mixing, bringing this, what I feel like is a very unified, connecting deeply to the divine. And I don't see any contradiction in bringing together all of that.
That's just beautiful. It's a lovely note to end on. I'd like to thank you, Tina, for joining us today and sharing your story. And I'm sure we'd love to touch base with you when you're back in Bali and perhaps, you know, see some of the artwork that you've been working on with everybody. So thank you.
Thank you so much.